He lit a match and watched my future burn, then swore I would never be free. But the man I loved had a secret that would turn our ashes into a new beginning. Hello, my darlings. I'm so glad to see you here today. Pull up a chair, settle in. This old heart has a story to tell, one that still catches in my throat when I remember it. My name is Alara Mayfield. I'm 81 years old, and I've spent my life here in Cedar Hollow. Tucked into these misty Appalachian hills, the air here tastes of pine and memory. This place raised me, and I never saw a reason to leave. It holds my whole world. You know, when I look out my window each morning at the way the fog clings to the ridges, like a soft gray blanket, I think about all the mornings that came before, each one a page in a long, complicated book. And today, I want to read you a chapter, the one that changed everything. Now, before this old woman begins, a small favor. Could you find that subscribe button below and give it a press? And the little bell too, so you never miss when I share another tale. It warms my soul to have new friends listening, like adding more family around the hearth. And if you're feeling kind, a like helps these stories travel to those who might need to hear them. Tell me down in the comments, where are you watching from today? And what part of the day brought you here? Morning tea, afternoon quiet, or evening stillness? I read every word you share, and it fills my cup to know you. A locked door is only a test of how badly you want to be free. All right, my dears. I called you here because I need to share a memory I've carried for decades. It's about the most painful day of my life, the day before I was to be married. An event that nearly ended everything. It involved my own father, a flame, and a man whose true strength I had yet to discover. It's a tale of deep sorrow, yes, but also of justice, of unexpected courage, and of a love that proved itself unbreakable. And to understand that day, you must first know the world I was born into. You must walk the polished floors of my childhood home, hear the particular tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, smell the lemon oil Mrs. Gable used on the banister every Thursday. It's in those small, sharp details that the truth of a life is often found. I came into this world in 1944, in a stately brick manor, right on Maple Lane. Not just a house, mind you, but a statement. 3 stories of red brick ivy, with a widow's walk up top and a wrought iron fence that seemed less like decoration and more like a warning. My father, Silas Mayfield, was a prominent judge in our county. Judge Mayfield to everyone else, a title he wore more proudly than his own skin. He was a broad-shouldered man with a silver watch chain he was always polishing. A man who wore his authority like a second skin. I can still see him in my mind's eye, standing before the fireplace, one hand in his pocket, jingling that chain. It was a sound that meant business, a sound that meant silence was required. His eyes were a pale, chilly blue, the color of a winter sky just before snow. He had a way of looking at you that made you feel transparent, as if he could see every unworthy thought rattling around in your head. His hair, silver even in his 40s, was always trimmed with military precision by old Mr. Finley at the barbershop on Main, every Saturday at 10, without fail. My mother, Lillian, was his opposite in every way. A wisp of a woman with pianist's fingers and a voice you had to lean in to hear. She'd been a music teacher before her marriage, a fact I only learned from a yellowed newspaper clipping I found tucked in a Bible. In the photo, she's young, smiling behind a piano, her eyes alive with a light I never saw at home. But my father insisted she stop. A judge's wife has her own symphony to conduct at home, he'd say, his voice leaving no room for debate. And she complied, always. Her symphony became the whisper of her skirts on the stairs, the soft chime of silver being sorted, the sigh of the porch swing on a summer afternoon. I remember her moving through our halls like a ghost, polishing silver, tending to her violets on the sun porch, her eyes holding a quiet ocean of sadness. She had a particular smell, my mother, lavender and faintly of chalk dust. She was a collection of delicate habits, the way she'd tilt her head when listening, the way she'd smooth her apron over her knees before sitting, the way she'd hum just under her breath, a fragment of a tune I never could place. It was a private song for her alone. I was their only child. After me, she couldn't have more. There were complications, whispered about behind closed doors. I think that sealed my fate in my father's eyes. I wasn't merely a daughter. I was the legacy, the soul vessel, the proof the Mayfield name would continue with proper standing. He reminded me constantly, his lessons delivered over breakfast or during our stiff, silent walks around the block. Ilara, you are the sole bearer of our line. You will marry accordingly. You will elevate it. You will not diminish it. My name, Ilara, wasn't chosen for its sweetness. It was my grandmother's name, the wife of a state senator. It came with expectations, woven into the very letters. Our home was a museum of his success. Dark oak paneling that drank the light. Heavy velvet drapes the color of dried blood. A grand staircase that echoed with every footstep. Persian rugs so thick your feet sank into them, silencing your passage. Every object had a provenance, a story of acquisition he liked to tell to guests. This spinet desk, Queen Anne, purchased at auction in Charlottesville. That landscape? A minor Hudson River school painter. A sound investment. But the sound I remember most, underneath it all, was the quiet. A thick, smothering quiet, like wool pressed against your ears. We moved softly, as if the floorboards themselves were listening. We spoke in measured tones. Laughter was a rare, startling sound, like a bird hitting a window. My father's word was the final, gavel on every matter, from the menu for Sunday supper to my mother's, wardrobe to the precise angle of the lawn chairs. Disagreement was not dissent. It was rebellion. And rebellion was met with a chilling silence that could last for days, or the sharp, shocking crack of his palm on the dining table that made the crystal tremble, and your heart freeze in your chest. With me, when I was small, he was different. Or perhaps I was too young to see the strings attached to the gifts. I was his little jewel. He'd lift me onto his polished desk and let me play with his brass. Scale of justice, the little weights clicking. He brought me dolls from Richmond, not the play kind, but collector's items with porcelain faces and hand-stitched dresses, meant to be admired on a shelf. Ribbons of French silk, storybooks with gold leaf edges and illustrations so beautiful they hurt to look at. But the price, even then, was perfection, unspoken but understood. By the time I was 6, the lessons had begun. Top marks at the Laurel Academy for young women were not a hope. They were a requirement. Impeccable posture was drilled into me, a book balanced on my head for an hour. After school, a smile that was polite but never too eager, never showing too much teeth. You are a reflection of this family, he'd intone. Adjusting my collar or smoothing my hair, see that it is a flattering one. The world judges a man by his wife and his daughter. Be the proof of my good judgment. Real friends were a luxury I couldn't afford. The girls at school saw me as the judge's daughter, an untouchable creature from the big house on the hill. My invitations to birthday parties were formalities, and I was never allowed to attend the sleepovers or the picnics down by the river. Unseemly, my father would say. You don't know their people. Boys were utterly forbidden, a threat so grave it was barely mentioned, just implied in the tightening of his jaw if one so much as looked my way on the street. My world, therefore, was the manicured garden behind our iron fence, an acre of controlled nature, rose bushes pruned into submission, boxwood hedges trimmed into severe rectangles, a gravel path that crunched with a sound like breaking bones. I'd invent kingdoms among the hydrangeas, whispering stories to the ladybugs. The old oak tree in the corner was my castle. The stone bird bath was my throne. In that green silent prison, my imagination ran wild, the only thing he couldn't control. Sometimes, on rare afternoons when my father was at his club or presiding over a late case, my mother would join me on the porch swing. She'd bring her knitting basket, and in the drowsy heat, she'd teach me. Cast on, knit, purl. Our needles would click-clack in a secret companionable code. She wouldn't say much, but her presence was a solace. The smell of her lavender, the warmth of her shoulder against mine, the way she'd sometimes let her hand rest on my hair for a moment. Those were my stolen moments of peace. The only currency of love I knew, but as I grew, the walls of my gilded cage began to shrink, to press in. By 12, I was being presented. Not introduced, presented, like a prize heifer at the county fair. Society teas at the women's club, charity luncheons, interminable holiday receptions. I had a uniform for these events, stiff, lace-trimmed dresses in pastel colors that made me look like a decorated cake. My hair pulled back so tight it gave me a headache. "My daughter Ilara," he'd announce, his hand a heavy, possessive weight on my shoulder, fingers digging in just enough to remind me to stand straight. Cultured and poised, she'll make a remarkable match. The men would nod, appraising. Their wives would smile with thin, practiced lips. I'd stand there, a smile frozen on my face, repeating the phrases I'd been taught. "Yes, sir. Thank you. Ma'am, the floral arrangements are lovely." I felt like a book on a shelf, beautifully bound, gilt-edged, but never to be opened, never to be truly read. The story inside was irrelevant. Only the cover mattered. And for too long, I believed this was simply what life was. That daughters were temporary guests in their father's house, awaiting transfer to a husband's. That a woman's will was like a wild vine, to be pruned and trained onto a proper trellis. My mother's life was the blueprint. Her silence was the lesson. I thought my restless heart, my hunger for something I couldn't name, was a flaw, a sickness of spirit I needed to cure. But you cannot cure a hunger for air. You cannot cure a longing for the sun. That cure nearly killed the patient in me. The turning point, the first crack in the foundation of my prison, came not with a bang, but with the quiet, dusty smell of old paper and the promise held within. The Cedar Hollow Public Library was my salvation. A Carnegie library, built of honey-colored sandstone, with 2 stone lions flanking the steps. It was a 15-minute walk from Maple Lane, a walk I was eventually granted permission to make twice a week, provided I was home before dusk and provided my borrowed books were suitable. My father's idea of suitable was biographies of great men, books on etiquette, and the approved classics, Dickens, Austen, but only the ones about finding a good husband. But within those hallowed walls, under the high, vaulted ceiling painted with constellations, I discovered a different world. Miss Ada, the librarian, was a thin, sharp-eyed woman with ink-stained fingers and a kindness she hid. Behind a no-nonsense demeanor, she saw the desperate look in my eyes. The way my hands trembled when I touched a new book. She became my silent co-conspirator. "Try this one, Ilara," she'd say, sliding a volume across the polished oak counter when no one else was near. It might be Willa Cather, her plains stretching vast and free, or Edith Wharton, whose gilded cages mirrored my own, but whose heroines had a fire I recognized. She introduced me to the Brontes. Oh, Jane Eyre. I read it hidden under my blankets with a flashlight, my heart pounding as Jane declared, "I am no bird, and no net ensnares me." I wept for her. I wept for me. Here was a plain, poor woman who valued her own soul above comfort, above security, above a man's twisted love. It was a revolutionary idea. Books became my secret language, my map to a country called self. In the pages of poetry, Emily, Dickinson's dashes of defiance, Whitman's joyful, sprawling I found a voice for feelings I didn't have words for. This private rebellion, this feeding of my mind, was the first act of disobedience that mattered. It gave me the strength for the second. And the second was Thomas. I was 20. It was the fall of 1964. The world outside was changing. Music was louder. Hemlines were rising. A restless energy was in the air, even in our sleepy hollow. I'd won a difficult, months-long campaign for permission to take a literature and composition course at the town's community hall. My arguments were tactical. It would improve my writing for correspondence. It was a respectable pursuit for a young lady. The instructor was a Mr. Thomas Clark, a known quantity in town. Father only allowed it because the hall was 2 blocks from his courthouse office. He could, in theory, keep an eye. Little did he know he was unlocking the door. On a crisp October afternoon, the air smelling of wood smoke and fallen leaves, I was searching the library stacks for a volume of Wordsworth from my first assignment. The slanting autumn light came through the tall windows, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air like gold powder. I was on my tiptoes, my fingers brushing the spine of an anthology, when a voice, warm and slightly amused, came from behind me. "Looking for a particular adventure?" I turned, nearly dropping the book I was holding. He was leaning against the end of a shelf, tall and lean, with wire-rimmed glasses that caught the light. He wore a tweed jacket with genuine leather patches on the elbows, and his hair was the color of walnut and just as unruly, as if he'd been running his hands through it. He had a gentle, watchful face, with smile lines already etching the corners of his eyes. But it was his eyes themselves that held me. A warm, intelligent brown, the color of good earth. I'm trying to find Wordsworth's Prelude, I managed, my voice barely above a whisper in the library hush. A formidable starting point, he said, pushing off from the shelf. He moved with an easy grace. The Journey of the Self, a good choice. He reached past me, his sleeve brushing my arm, and pulled a green volume from a higher shelf. This edition has excellent notes. I'm Thomas, by the way. Thomas Clark. I teach the evening classes at the hall. Can I point you in any other right directions? His voice was like warm honey, unhurried, inviting conversation rather than demanding it. We talked for an hour, or maybe it was 2. Time lost all meaning. We sat at one of the heavy oak tables, surrounded by the silent, towering books. We spoke of sonnets and stories, of the romantic poet's love of nature, of the way light falls through autumn leaves, and what it makes a person feel. He didn't lecture. He asked questions. What do you think Wordsworth is trying to say about memory here? Why does this line move you? He listened, truly listened, his head tilted, his eyes on my face, as if my thoughts were the most important thing in the world. No one had ever done that. In my world, I was asked for recitation, not opinion. He told me he'd grown up in Millworth, a textile town 100 miles south. His father had worked a loom until the dust took his lungs. His mother had taken in sewing. We had books, though, he said, a soft pride in his voice. My mother traded her mending for them, a shirt for a volume of Emerson, a hem for a book of fairy tales. They were our windows. He'd won a scholarship, studied literature, and come to Cedar Hollow to teach because he believed stories could change lives. Could be windows for others, too. He rented a small apartment above the hardware store. It's not much, he confessed. 2 rooms and a view of the alley. But it has a fireplace that actually works, and shelves for my books. I have everything I need, he told me once, sipping tea from a chipped mug at the library's small adjunct cafe. A roof, my books, the chance to open doors for others. What more is there? To me, shackled by possessions and status, it sounded like a symphony of freedom. A life built on meaning, not appearances, on choice, not command. I fell in love with him, of course. But more than that, I fell in love with the world he represented, a world of intellectual equality, of shared curiosity, of a partnership where 2 minds could meet. It was a world where I could be a Lara, not just Judge Mayfield's daughter. Our courtship was a secret, fragile and beautiful thing, conducted in the stolen margins of my life. For 8 months we met where we could. The old covered bridge on the edge of town where the creek chuckled over stones. We'd walk along its banks, kicking up leaves, talking of everything. He dreamed of starting a mobile library, a bookmobile, to serve the remote mountain communities, where children might never see a picture book. He had sketches, cost estimates, a passionate, detailed vision. I dreamed of breathing without permission, of choosing my own breakfast, my own dress, my own path. He introduced me to coffee, bitter and wonderful, at the diner near the bus station. He read me poetry he loved, E. Cummings, Langston Hughes, his voice low and full of feeling in the quiet of the library. After hours when Miss Ada let us stay, he once brought me a single perfect crimson leaf, its veins like a tiny map. For your collection, he'd said. I pressed it in my heaviest dictionary, where my father would never think to look. It was a token of a real, tangible world outside my fence. He was the first man who saw me. Not a reflection, not a legacy, not a pretty object. He saw the girl who loved words, who had a quiet stubbornness, who laughed at his silly impressions of the town council. He saw the fear in my eyes when I checked my watch, and he never made me feel foolish for it. He just held my hand tighter. One day, he'd whisper, his breath warm against my temple. One day, you won't have to run on anyone's schedule but your own. Of course, in a town like Cedar Hollow, secrets have short lives. They are carried on the wind, reflected in shop windows, whispered over garden fences. Our secret was a small, bright flame, and it was only a matter of time before it drew the wrong kind of attention. It was a busybody cousin, Eleanor, who saw us. She spotted us walking back from the botanical gardens one Saturday afternoon, Thomas carrying my books, my head tilted toward him as I laughed at something he'd said. We weren't touching. We were yards apart. But the intimacy was plain as day. Eleanor, whose own marriage had been a strategic merger of two farm families, smelled scandal and opportunity. She went straight to my father's office. The explosion that night shook the very foundations of the house on Maple Lane. I was in the parlor, attempting to embroider, when I heard the front door slam with such force a small porcelain shepherdess vibrated off the mantel and shattered on the hearth. My blood turned to ice. He stormed into the room, still in his overcoat, his face a thundercloud. "You, upstairs, now." The words were bitten off, lethal. In his study, under the grim portrait of his own judge father, the inquisition began. "Who is he?" Spit flew from his lips. "Thomas Clark? The schoolteacher?" He made the word sound like a curse. "The son of a mill worker? Have you taken leave of your senses, girl? Or are you just intent on humiliating me?" I tried to explain Thomas's character, his kindness, his intelligence. "He's a good man, father. He respects me." "Respects you?" He roared, slamming his fist on the desk. "He respects your inheritance, your name. He's a fortune hunter, a social climber of the most pathetic kind, using books and pretty words to snare a naive girl from a good family. I will not have it! Do you hear me? I will not have the Mayfield name dragged through the mud by some pedagogue." The verdict was swift and absolute. I was forbidden from leaving the house. The literature course was terminated. My library privileges were revoked. He confined me to my room for a week, meals brought up on a tray by a pale, tight-lipped Mrs. Gable. My mother wept silently in the hallway, but when I reached for her, she shrank back, terror in her eyes. The walls of my cage were no longer gilded. They were stone, and they were closing in. But Thomas? My Thomas didn't vanish. He didn't slink away like a whipped dog, as my father predicted. He sent notes, beautiful, aching notes, delivered by the one ally I had inside. Mrs. Gable. She'd been with our family since before I was born. She'd seen my mother fade. She'd seen me grow quiet. She hated my father with a quiet, steel-cold fury. And her heart was a reservoir of pity for me. She'd slip the folded papers under my dinner plate, or tuck them inside a clean pillowcase. Those letters were lifelines thrown to a drowning woman. He wrote of his love, his steadfastness. He quoted Sonnet 116, "Love is not love, which alters when it alteration finds." He wrote of practical things, too, that he was saving, that he'd found a little cottage for rent on Sycamore Street with a view of the hills. "It has a porch where we can have coffee in the morning," he wrote, "and a yard big enough for a dog, if you'd like one." He painted a picture of a normal, quiet, free life, a life of small, glorious choices. He ended every letter the same way. "I will wait, however long it takes. You are worth every second." His words were a fire in my own heart, banked but burning. After 2 months of imprisonment, of silent meals and my father's triumphant, icy disregard, something in me broke open. Not into pieces, but into resolve. I had to face him. Not as a pleading child, but as a woman. I chose a Thursday evening. He was in his study, reviewing case files, a glass of brandy at his elbow. I didn't knock. I walked in and stood before his massive desk, my hands clenched at my sides to stop their trembling. "I am going to marry Thomas Clark," I said. My voice shook, but it was clear. It filled the room. "With your blessing or without it, I am of legal age. I love him and he loves me. That is my final word." The silence that followed was more terrifying than any shout. He slowly set down his pen. He looked up, and the expression on his face was one of pure, unadulterated contempt, mixed with a disbelief so profound it was almost funny. He rose from his chair, a mountain of fury in a 3-piece suit. You stand in my house, funded by my work, clothed by my money, and you dictate to me?" He came around the desk. I stood my ground. "You wish to be a pauper's wife? To live in squalor? To wipe the noses of his brats in some damp rented hovel?" He was close now, his breath smelling of brandy and cigars. "Then go, but you walk out that door with nothing. Not a dime of my money, not a stick of furniture. You go in the clothes on your back. Do you hear me? You will be dead to me. I thought it was over. The finality of it was a physical blow. I felt the world drop away. But then, from the doorway, a sound, a small choked sound that became a word. Silas. My mother stood there, a silhouette against the lighted hall. She was trembling, her knuckles white where she gripped the doorframe. But she stood. She is our child, my mother said. Her voice was a thin, sharp blade, a tool we'd never seen her wield. Let her go, or you will lose her forever. Is that what you want? An empty house and a name no one will want to marry into? Because you drove your own flesh and blood away? He stared at her, his jaw working. The shock on his face was priceless. The mouse had roared. For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. Then he turned his gaze back to me. The contempt now glazed with a new, chilling calculation. Fine, he hissed. The word was like acid. Marry your beggar. Playhouse. But you will regret it. You have no idea of the world. You are soft. You are weak. And when reality breaks you, when you come crawling back, hungry and shamed, I will be sure you remember this folly. You will remember it every day you spend under my roof again. In the room I allow you, eating the food I provide out of charity. He pointed a long, bony finger at me. Mark my words, girl. You will regret it. He turned his back, dismissing us both. My mother sagged against the doorframe. I walked out on legs that felt like water, but my heart was a drum. I had done it. I had declared my independence. It was a Pyrrhic victory, bought with the promise of total disinheritance and eternal enmity, but it was mine. What followed was a strange, tense interlude. The silence in the house deepened, but its quality changed. It was no longer a smothering quiet. It was the silence of a cold war. My father acted as if I were already dead, a ghost haunting his halls. He would look through me at the dinner table. He never spoke my name. My mother moved between us like a nervous dove, trying to tend to us both and pleasing neither. But in my heart, there was a cautious, defiant joy. Thomas and I could plan in the open, or as open as we dared. We set a date, June 19th, 1965, a Saturday. We wanted a simple service at the little white chapel at the edge of town, followed by a modest reception in its fellowship hall. My mother, in secret, gave me a small envelope of money, her own pin savings, hoarded from the household allowance over 20 years. For your trousseau, she whispered, her eyes darting to the door. Don't tell him. Thomas had found the cottage on Sycamore Street. He took me to see it one brilliant spring afternoon. It was tiny, painted a faded but cheerful yellow, with a sloping roof and a porch that wrapped around one side. The view was just as he promised, a rolling green hill, dotted with grazing sheep rising to meet the sky. Inside, it smelled of lemon polish and sunshine. There were 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a porcelain sink, a living room with a brick fireplace. It's not Maple Lane, Thomas said, watching my face. It's better, I breathed. It's ours. I could already see our books on the shelves, a braided rug on the wooden floor, curtains fluttering in the open window. It was a home, not a museum. My wedding dress was my one extravagance. With my mother's secret money and a small inheritance from a spinster aunt who had, in her own way, escaped, I went to a seamstress in the next town over. The dress was simple elegance, ivory satin that fell in clean lines, with delicate, sheer lace sleeves and a modest boat neck. It wasn't a grand ball gown. It was the dress of a woman ready to step into her own life. I kept it shrouded in a cotton bag in the very back of my closet at home, and I would visit it like a pilgrim to a shrine, touching the fabric, dreaming of the walk down the short aisle to where Thomas would be waiting, his kind eyes full of love. But a sinister counterpoint to our planning began. The week before the wedding, my father started drinking, not his usual evening brandy, but heavy, daytime drinking. Bourbon, straight from the decanter he kept in his study. He'd come home from court at lunchtime, smelling of it. He'd sit in his wing-back chair in the darkening parlor, glass in hand, staring at nothing. The air in the house grew thick with a new kind of dread, an unpredictable, volatile menace. I tried to avoid him. Thomas saw the fear in my eyes when we met. Just a few more days, my love, he'd whisper, holding me close in the safe haven of the library stacks. Then you're free. I promise. He can't touch you once you're my wife. We were both pretending, trying to bolster each other's courage. But we were terrified. We knew Silas Mayfield. We knew he did not accept defeat. He simply changed tactics. The eve of my wedding, June 18th, 1965, arrived. The day had been a whirlwind of last-minute details. The flowers were ordered, simple daisies and baby's breath. The cake, a small vanilla confection, was waiting at the bakery. Thomas had gone to stay with his friend, the town doctor, following the tradition of not seeing the bride before the wedding. The cottage was ready. A bouquet of wildflowers from Thomas already in a jar on the kitchen table. As dusk settled, painting the sky in lavender and peach, a strange calm fell over me. The fear was still there, a cold stone in my stomach. But it was joined by a resolute peace. Tomorrow I would cross the threshold. I went to my room for one last look, one last private moment with the symbol of my new beginning. I drew back the protective cotton bag and touched the cool, sleek satin of my dress. It felt like hope. I imagined the weight of it on my shoulders tomorrow. The sound of the simple organ music, the feel of Thomas's hand in mine. I was so lost in the beautiful future that I didn't hear his approach. The first warning was the smell, the sharp, sweet, cloying scent of Kentucky bourbon, cutting through the rosewater scent of my room. I turned. He filled the doorway, silhouetted by the hall light. A bottle dangled loosely from his fingers. His tie was askew, his shirt collar open. His eyes, when they found me, were glassy, dark pools of something unhinged. "Tomorrow," he slurred, the word thick and mangled. "Tomorrow you spit on my name, on everything I built." "Father, please," I said, taking a step back, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Let's not do this tonight." "Let's?" he mocked, stumbling into the room. "You don't let me do anything." "Not anymore, right? You're your own woman." The sarcasm was a lash. His gaze fell on the dress. A strange, grotesque smile twisted his lips. "What's this? The shroud for your old life?" He lunged, not at me, but at the dress. He yanked it from the closet, the hanger snapping with a sound like a gunshot. I cried out, grabbing for the satin. "No!" He shoved me, hard. I fell backwards onto the bed, the breath knocked out of me. My mother appeared in the doorway, her face a mask of horror. "Silas, stop! For God's sake!" He ignored her, a man possessed. He dragged my beautiful dress, my hope, across the floor, out of my room and down the stairs. I scrambled up and ran after him, my screams tearing at my throat. "Give it back, please!" Mrs. Gable appeared from the kitchen, her hand over her mouth. Jed, the gardener, was coming in from the back, wiping his hands on his trousers. He stopped, frozen. The scene was a surreal nightmare, lit by the fading twilight through the windows. My father marched through the silent, grand house, through the French doors, and out into the brick-paved courtyard. Our neighbors, the Higginses, were on their porch across the street. I saw them stand up, peer over the hedge. My father threw my dress in a heap on the bricks, the ivory satin a stark, accusing splash against the red clay. I fell to my knees beside it, clutching the fabric, sobbing uncontrollably. "Please, Daddy, please don't." I hadn't called him Daddy since I was 10. The word was a child's plea, ripped from a place of primal terror. He looked down at me, and for a second, I saw something, not pity, but a flicker of recognition of the pain he was causing. Then it was gone, extinguished by the bourbon and a lifetime of needing to control. He turned and walked, with a terrifying steadiness now, back into the house. My mother was weeping, pulling at my arm. "Get up, Alara, get up." But I was rooted to the spot, clinging to my dress as if it were a life raft. He returned. In his hands was the large metal can of lantern fuel, Jed used for the outdoor lamps. The acrid chemical smell cut through the evening air. My blood ran cold. "No, no, no, no!" I screamed, trying to gather the dress into my arms, to shield it with my body. He began to pour. The clear liquid splashed onto the delicate satin, soaking it, turning it dark and heavy. The smell was nauseating. I gagged but held on. "Please, God, no!" I begged, looking up at his face. It was a stone mask, a judge passing a death sentence. He finished pouring. He tossed the can aside with a clatter. He reached into his pocket. He struck a match. The scratch hiss of the phosphorus was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The small flame danced at the end of the matchstick. illuminating his cold, triumphant eyes for a split second. Then he dropped it. The world erupted in a whoop of orange and gold. Fire, hungry and immediate, raced across the fuel-soaked fabric. The lace sleeves blackened and curled. The satin melted and bubbled. The heat was immense, a physical wall that forced me back, my hands flying up to shield my face. The light was hellish, dancing over the brick, over my father's impassive face, over my mother's crumpled form. I could only kneel and watch. My sobs were silent now, choked by the horror. This wasn't just a dress burning. It was my future, my choice, my love. It was me. He was burning me in effigy, destroying the symbol of my rebellion for all the neighbors to see. The flames roared, a miniature pyre in the heart of his perfect courtyard. Black, greasy smoke billowed up into the twilight sky, a signal of his absolute dominion. It seemed to last forever. The crackle and pop of the fabric, the sickly sweet smell of burning chemicals and charred silk. The neighbors across the street were standing in a silent, appalled row. Jed had taken off his cap and was staring at the ground. Mrs. Gable was weeping openly. When the flames finally began to die down, leaving a smoldering, blackened pile of ruin, he spoke. His voice was cold, sober, and utterly clear, cutting through the haze of smoke and despair. "You will never marry while I draw breath. Alara," he said, each word a nail in a coffin. "You belong to me. You always have. This is what happens to dreams that defy me." He turned on his heel and walked back into the house, leaving me kneeling in the ashes, the heat from the dying embers still warming the bricks beneath me. The world had ended. I was nothing, a hollowed-out shell, covered in the soot of my own dreams. I don't know how long I stayed there. The sky deepened from bruised purple to full night. Stars emerged, cold and indifferent. The embers glowed a sullen red. My mother, her strength utterly spent, finally managed to get me to my feet. I was limp, unresisting. She half carried, half dragged me inside, away from the awful accusing pile in the courtyard. Inside, the house was a tomb. The smell of smoke clung to us. My father was sitting in his wing-back chair in the parlor, a fresh glass of bourbon in his hand, as if he'd just returned from a mildly tiresome business meeting. The fire in the hearth was lit, cheerful and normal, an obscene contrast to the one he'd just set outside. He looked at me as we passed, my dress stained with soot, my face streaked with tears and ash. "Now you understand," he said, not a question, a statement of fact. "There is no Thomas, no wedding, no escape. There is only this house and my will. You will obey, you will stay, and if I must keep you here in this room for the rest of your life to make you understand that, I will." Something in me shattered then, but it wasn't my heart. My heart felt like it had been burned to ash along with the dress. It was the last illusion, the final childish hope that somewhere underneath the judge, the tyrant, was the father who loved me. That love was gone, revealed as a fiction. I was a prized asset in his portfolio, and I had tried to remove myself from his balance sheet. This was the penalty. Total liquidation. I didn't speak. I walked upstairs, each step a monumental effort. I went to my room, closed the door, and turned the key. The click of the lock was a small, pathetic act of defiance. He had already locked me in from the outside. I was just making it official. Then I crumpled. I slid down the back of the door until I was a heap on the floor. My arms wrapped around my knees. Despair, a black, suffocating tide, washed over me. The images played on a loop behind my eyes, the match flaring, the whoomp of the flames, the triumphant set of his shoulders as he walked away, the smoldering heap that had been my future. The practical horrors dawned on me one by one, cold and sharp. How could I warn Thomas? The wedding was at 11 tomorrow morning. He would be at the chapel, nervous, adjusting his tie, waiting for me. He would wait and wait. The guests, the few brave friends, Miss Ada, the doctor and his wife, would shift uncomfortably in the pews. Whispering would start. He would think I'd changed my mind, that the pressure, the fear, had been too much, that I had chosen the Gilded Cage after all. The thought of him standing there, hope dying in his eyes, was a physical agony worse than the burn of the flames. My father had thought of everything. I heard him moving downstairs. the heavy thud of the front door bolt being shot, the rattle of the kitchen door lock, the distinct final click of the deadbolt on the pantry window. Our oldest, most awkward means of egress. He was methodical, sobering up with a terrible purpose. He was turning the house on Maple Lane into a fortress, and I was the treasure he would not lose. He even disconnected the telephone in the hall, yanking the cord from the wall. I heard the plastic crack. Communication was severed. I was in a silent, isolated cell. Hours passed. The grandfather clock in the hall gonged 11, then 12. Each chime was a hammer blow on my future. I paced the 6 steps from my door to the window and back, a caged animal. I looked out at the apple tree in the backyard, its branches silhouetted against the moon. I'd climbed it as a child. Could I now? In the dark, in a nightgown? And then what? Run through the streets to Thomas's friend's house? I had no shoes, no coat, no dignity left. I would be a madwoman, a spectacle. He would win anyway. The despair morphed into a terrifying numbness. What if I just stopped? What if this was the universe telling me I was not meant for a life of my own? What if my mother's path was the only one for a woman like me? A life of quiet suffering, of making the best of a prison because the outside world was too terrifying to face alone? I thought of Thomas's face, his kind eyes. I was going to fail him. I was going to break the heart of the best man I'd ever known. The shame of it was a taste like copper in my mouth. It must have been 2 a.m. when I heard the faintest sound at my bedroom door. Not a knock, a scrape. Then the soft, metallic click-clack of a key turning in the lock. My heart seized. Was it him? Coming to gloat? To deliver another sermon? The door opened a crack. It was my mother. She slipped inside, a wraith in her white nightgown and robe, and closed the door silently behind her. In the moonlight, her face was ravaged, years older. She came to me where I sat on the floor and knelt, taking my icy hands in hers. "I am so sorry," she whispered, her voice raw. "I am so weak. I should have stopped him. I should have thrown myself on that dress. I should have been a mother." Tears streamed down her face. But I was afraid. I have always been afraid. "Mom, I need to get word to Thomas," I said, the words bursting from me. "If he goes to that church tomorrow and I'm not there, he'll think I abandoned him. I need him to know I didn't, that I'm trapped." She shook her head, despairing. "He's locked everything. The phone is dead. He's sleeping in the chair in the foyer. Ilara, he's guarding the door like a dragon. I can't get out." The last spark of hope sputtered. I laid my head on my knees. This was it. This was the end. But then my mother's hands tightened on mine. "Wait," she breathed. "Mrs. Gable, her room is over the garage. She has her own outside stairs. He didn't lock those." My head snapped up. "Mrs. Gable, our ally. Could you get to her? Without him hearing?" "I can try," my mother said, a grim determination settling on her features. It was a look I'd never seen. "For once in my life, I will try." She left us silently as she came. I waited, every nerve screaming. 5 minutes? 10? An eternity? Then a new sound. Not at the door. Tap, tap, tap. It was faint, coming from the window. I scrambled over. There, on a rickety wooden ladder I recognized as Jed's pruning ladder, was Mrs. Gable. Her hair was in a rag curler, a shawl thrown over her nightdress. In her hand was a small folded piece of paper. She gestured frantically for me to open the window. I did, my hands fumbling with the latch, terrified the sound would echo through the silent house. "I went," she whispered, her voice a dry leaf in the wind. I put on my coat and walked straight to Dr. Avery's house. I threw pebbles at the guest room window until Mr. Clark woke up. She shoved the paper at me. "He wrote this. He needs an answer. Quick, child. I'll wait." I grabbed the paper and lit the small oil lamp on my nightstand with trembling hands. The handwriting was Thomas's, but it was rushed, jagged. "Ilara, my love, my heart. Mrs. Gable told me. I feel a rage I did not know I possessed. Are you safe? Are you hurt? What do you need me to do? Do I come now and break down the door? Do I call the sheriff? Tell me. I am here. I am with you. However this ends, we end it together. Yours always, T." The tears that came now were different. They were hot, fierce tears of relief, of love, of a rekindled fury. He knew. He hadn't assumed the worst. He was ready to fight. I wasn't alone. I found my stationery and a pen. My hand shook, but my will was steady. Thomas, he burned it all. He says I am his property. He has locked every door and window. I am a prisoner. I am so afraid. But I love you. I have not given up. I am not strong enough to break out, but I am strong enough to wait for you to break in. Find me, tomorrow. Do what you must. I trust you. With all my soul, E. I folded it, handed it out the window to Mrs. Gable's waiting hand. She nodded, a fierce little gesture, and disappeared down the ladder into the shadows. I had thrown a lifeline. Now I had to wait to see if it was caught. Dawn came, pale and merciless. June 19th, 1965, my wedding day. I had not slept. I had sat by the window, watching the sky lighten from black to gray to a cool, clear blue. It was a beautiful day. The birds sang with cruel cheerfulness. At 7 o'clock sharp, I heard my father stir downstairs. The groan of his chair, his heavy footsteps going to the kitchen. The clank of the percolator. The sound of doors being unlocked, not to let anyone in, but to re-establish the normalcy of the prison. He was the warden, beginning his rounds. At 8, a knock on my door. Ilara, downstairs, now. His voice was crisp, cold, utterly in control. The drunk, raging monster of last night was gone. In his place was the judge, ready to pass sentence. I washed my face, the water cold. I put on a simple, light blue day dress. I looked in the mirror. The woman who looked back had shadows like bruises under her eyes. But her gaze was steady. The fear was still there, a cold knot, but it had been joined by something else, a desperate, flinting hope, and a resolve that felt like stone. He could break my things, but he could not break me. Not anymore. I went downstairs. He was at the dining table, impeccably dressed in a gray suit, reading the Cedar Hollow Gazette. A cup of black coffee steamed beside him. He didn't look up. Sit. I sat, perching on the edge of the chair. You will spend the day in your room, he said, turning a page with a rustle. You will be quiet. You will not attempt to leave or signal from the windows. If that man comes to the door, I will deal with him. I will inform him that you have had a change of heart, that you are unwell, that the engagement is terminated. You will not contradict me. You will not show yourself. Is that understood? I looked at him, really looked at him. The fine lines around his mouth, the perfectly trimmed hair, the arrogant set of his shoulders. This man had terrorized my mother and me for decades. He had tried to burn my future to the ground. And in that moment, I saw not a powerful judge, but a small, frightened man clinging to control because it was all he had. The fear I saw in his eyes last night wasn't for me. It was the fear of a king whose subject dared to leave the kingdom. You can lock all the doors in this house, I said. My voice surprisingly calm, clear as bell. You can lock me in my room. You can burn everything I own. You can disown me and curse my name. I leaned forward slightly. But you cannot lock me away forever. My body might be here, but you lost my heart and soul a long time ago. One day I will walk out of here, and when you die alone, bitter, and unmourned in this echoing museum, I will not be there. You will have no one, and that, Father, will be your real punishment. He put the paper down slowly. The color had drained from his face. For the first time, my words had hit their mark. He opened his mouth to deliver a crushing retort. Ding-dong, the doorbell, a normal, cheerful sound. It rang once, then again, immediately, insistent. My father's eyes flickered to the foyer, then back to me, a warning in them. You, stay, here. He rose, straightened his tie, and walked to the front door. Assuming the mantle of the respectable householder, I got up and stood in the dining room archway, my mother hovering behind me in the kitchen door, her face pale. I heard the door open. Thomas, what an unexpected visit. My father's voice was smooth, condescending. I've come for my wife, Judge Mayfield. Thomas's voice. But it was not the warm, honeyed tone I knew. It was flat, hard, cold steel wrapped in velvet. I'm afraid there's been a change of plans. Ilara has had time to reflect. She's realized the impracticality of the situation. She's asked me to convey her apologies and to end the engagement. Ilara didn't reconsider anything, Thomas replied, his voice cutting through my father's lies like a scalpel. You destroyed her personal property last night. You burned her wedding dress in your courtyard in a drunken rage, in front of witnesses. You have since held her against her will in this house. I believe the legal term is false imprisonment. Sheriff Daniels would find that a very interesting conversation, I'm sure. My father spluttered. How dare you? This is my home. You will not slander me on my own doorstep. The dress was an accident. A tragic accident. The Higginses across the street have a very clear view of your courtyard, Thomas said, his voice dangerously quiet. I've already spoken to them this morning. They described it in vivid detail. It didn't sound like an accident. It sounded like arson and intentional infliction of emotional distress. I couldn't stay back. I walked into the foyer. Thomas stood there on the porch, dressed in his best suit, the one he'd gotten married in. He looked tired, but his posture was straight, his jaw set. When he saw me, his eyes softened for a fraction of a second. A flash of such profound love and concern, it nearly buckled my knees. Then his gaze returned to my father, hardening again. My father moved to block the doorway physically. You are not welcome here. Get off my property. It's not your property, Thomas said. And he took a deliberate step forward, crossing the threshold. My father grabbed his arm. I said, get out. What happened next seemed to occur in slow motion. Thomas's free hand shot up and caught my father's wrist. He didn't yank or shove. He just held it, his grip like iron. My father, a strong man, grimaced, trying to pull away. He couldn't. Thomas leaned in close, his voice dropping to a low, deadly register I had never heard. Do not, he said, each word a distinct, separate threat, ever touch her again. And that includes touching me to keep me from her. Do you understand? He released my father's wrist. My father stumbled back a step, rubbing his wrist, his face a mask of shock and humiliated fury. I'm calling the police, he shouted. Assault! Trespassing! Please do, Thomas said, a thin, cold smile touching his lips. It was the smile of a man holding 4 aces. But before you do, Judge, let's have a frank discussion about your financial affairs. It might change your mind about who needs the law's protection. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a long, legal-sized envelope. He opened it and extracted a sheaf of documents. These are mortgages, Thomas said, holding them up. On this house. On your summer property on Willow Lake. These are promissory notes, signed by you from some rather unfortunate speculative investments last year. The Asheville Merchant Bank was poised to foreclose on everything next week. You're leveraged to the hilt, Judge. You've been living on reputation and credit, and the credit has run out. My father had gone bone white. Those are private documents. How did you— That's theft. It's due diligence, Thomas corrected him calmly. When the woman I loved told me about her father, I looked into the man. Not the judge, the man. And I found a house of cards. He took another step into the foyer, and my father, for the first time in his life, retreated. Yesterday, after Mrs. Gable brought me Alara's note, I didn't go to the sheriff first. I took the first train to Asheville. I met with the bank's head of distressed assets at 8 o'clock this morning, and I bought your debt, all of it, every last penny of principal and interest. I paid cash. You're a schoolteacher, my father whispered, the foundation of his world cracking beneath him. You live above a hardware store. My mother's maiden name was Reed, Thomas said, his voice still even. Her brother is Harlan Reed, of Reed Timber. The name landed like a thunderclap. Harlan Reed was one of the richest men in the state, a self-made timber baron, famous for his wealth and his no-nonsense attitude. When I explained the situation to my uncle, Thomas continued, when I told him I needed to free the woman, I loved from a tyrant who used money and fear as weapons. He was more than eager to help. He wired the funds immediately. So, as of 9:45 this morning, Judge Mayfield, I own the paper on your life. This house, the lake property, the debts at the tailors and the jewelers, they're all mine. He let that hang in the air. The silence was absolute, broken only by the frantic ticking of the hall clock. Now, Thomas said, folding the papers and tucking them away, here are your choices. You can gather your personal effects, clothes, toiletries, whatever you can carry in one suitcase, and you can leave this house voluntarily within the next 10 minutes. Or I can call Sheriff Daniels, have you formally removed for trespassing, and you can leave in handcuffs. Either way, you are leaving. This is no longer your home. The collapse was total, absolute, and horrifying to watch. My father, Silas Mayfield, pillar of the community, master of his domain, seemed to physically shrink. His shoulders slumped. The arrogant light in his eyes guttered and died. He looked from Thomas's implacable face to mine, and in my eyes he saw no pity, no triumph, just a cold final distance. He had lost, not just the battle, but the war. He had gambled everything on control, and he had lost it all. Without a word, he turned and walked. Like a much older man, up the grand staircase. We heard his footsteps in his room, the sound of drawers opening and closing. 10 minutes later, he came back down, carrying one worn leather suitcase. He didn't look at either of us. He walked straight out the front door, down the steps, and disappeared down Maple Lane. He never looked back. The silence he left behind was different. It was the silence after a storm, a clean, aching, hopeful quiet. Thomas let out a long, shaky breath, and the stern mask fell away. In 2 strides he was across the room and had me in his arms, holding me so tightly I could barely breathe. But I never wanted him to let go. I buried my face in his shoulder, inhaling the familiar, wonderful scent of him, soap, wool, and paper. "I've got you," he whispered into my hair, his voice cracking. "I've got you, my love. You're safe. You're free." True love doesn't build cages. It tears down walls. It doesn't ask for obedience. It offers partnership. It doesn't burn your dreams. It helps you build new ones from the ashes. My mother emerged from the kitchen. She looked at Thomas, then at me, and a slow, tremulous smile broke through her tears. "Go," she whispered. "Be free. Be happy." She kissed my cheek. She was choosing her prison, but she was giving me her blessing to leave mine. It was the bravest thing she'd ever done. Thomas had thought of everything. From his friend's car, he brought in a simple cream-colored linen dress. "It's not satin," he said apologetically. "It's perfect," I said. And it was. We were married that afternoon in the little white chapel, with Mrs. Gable and Jed as our witnesses, and the kind Dr. Avery and his wife as our guests. Miss Ada came, bringing a book of love sonnets as a gift. The sun streamed through the plain glass windows. I wore the cream dress and a single daisy in my hair. Thomas held my hands, his own trembling slightly, and we said the words that joined our lives. For better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish. We meant every word. We walked out of that chapel into the bright June afternoon, and we began. We turned that cold, echoing manor on Maple Lane into a home. We sold it within a year. Neither of us could bear its ghosts, and used the money to buy our little yellow cottage on Sycamore Street outright. We painted the shutters a cheerful blue. Thomas built bookshelves that covered an entire wall. I planted a rambling rose bush by the porch. We kept our promises. Thomas, with the modest but steady backing of his uncle, launched the Blue Ridge Bookmobile a year later, an old, reprovised postal truck painted sky blue, packed with shelves. He'd drive the winding mountain roads every Wednesday and Saturday, a traveling sanctuary of stories. I'd often go with him, helping children pick out their books, seeing their eyes light up just as mine once had in the Cedar Hollow Library. It was our shared mission, our happy work. I got my teaching certificate and taught reading at the elementary school. We didn't have much money, but we had enough. More than enough, because we had each other, and a life built on respect and joy. We had noisy Sunday breakfasts, debates over books by the fire, long walks where we held hands and talked about everything and nothing. My father drifted. He lived in a boarding house in a nearby city, living off a small annuity that was all he had left that wasn't tied to his debts. He never contacted me. I heard through the town grapevine when he died of a heart attack a decade later. Alone in a rented room. I did not go to the funeral. I felt a faint pang for the father he might have been, but no grief for the man he was. Thomas held me that night and said, "You have no obligation to mourn a jailer." I had made my peace with his loss long before his heart stopped beating. My mother visited us sometimes when she could get away. She grew quieter, frailer, but there was a peace in her eyes she'd never had at Maple Lane. She passed away 5 years after my father, and I mourned her deeply, the woman she was, and the woman she might have been. Thomas and I had 2 children. Lucas, born in 1967, serious and bright-eyed. And then Clara, in 1970, a whirlwind of laughter and stubbornness. Thomas was a wonderful father, patient, playful, present. He read to them every night, helped them with projects, showed them by example what it meant to be a good man. He broke the cycle, completely and utterly. Our home was filled with music, with mud tracked in from the garden, with the smell of baking bread and shared dreams. The years flowed like a gentle river. We saw our children grow, go to college, fall in love, build their own lives. We welcomed grandchildren. I retired from teaching. Thomas drove the bookmobile well into his 70s, until his eyesight made the mountain roads a worry. We sat on our porch, watching the sun set over our hill, our hands intertwined, our shared history a comfortable weight between us. He passed 5 years ago in his sleep in our bed. A quiet end to a loud, loving life. The doctor said it was his heart, just stopping, peaceful as a sigh. I was lost for a long time. The cottage felt cavernous without him. But I was not empty. I was filled to the brim with 54 years of love, of partnership, of inside jokes and weathered challenges and a million small, perfect moments. His love had not just freed me from a prison. It had given me a world. And that world remained, in our children, in our garden, in the memory of the bookmobile's blue paint, in every well-loved book on our shelves. So to you listening, my dear new friends, if you feel trapped by family, by a relationship, by expectations, by fear, know this: you are not property. Your dreams are not kindling. You deserve a love that liberates, that sees you, that champions you. The darkest hour, the moment when the match is struck and everything seems lost, is just before the dawn. Find your courage. It is there, deeper than you know. Ask for help. Your Mrs. Gable is out there. Your Thomas is out there. Your window exists. And to those who can be the helpers, be the hand that reaches in, be the ally, be the safe harbor. You never know when a simple act, a passed note, a ladder in the dark, a believing heart, can change the entire course of a human life. Now, my dears, if this story from an old woman's heart has touched you, please do me a kindness. Give this video a like. It tells the algorithm that stories of courage and love still matter. Subscribe to my Story TV and ring that bell. We have so many more tales to share, of heartbreak and hope, of times gone by and lessons learned the hard way. Share this with someone who might need to hear it today. And tell me in the comments below, where does your story begin? What cage are you or someone you love trying to open? Sending love and strength to each of you, from my porch to wherever you are. Remember, always remember, you deserve your own free, beautiful life. Don't let anyone, not even someone who claims to love you, convince you otherwise. Goodbye for now, darlings.